His grandmother was terrified after seeing him at birth and screamed that he was much too fat. Born with a swollen, misshapen head and a grossly overweight body, he soon turned into an average child with an average physique, who hated school, skipping most of the classes and almost getting expelled. Slow in learning to speak, he had considered dropping out of his education, working to sell life insurance instead. Intensely fond of playing the violin, his academic performance improved as a teenager, but even with a degree, he could not find a job in academia. Goals of a doctorate were thwarted, and with no other profession intent on welcoming him, he began work as a patent clerk, seemingly surrendering his dreams to a life of stable monotony. Then, in the midst of the mundane, the magic happened. In 1905, the much beleaguered and frustrated 20-something man wrote a paper that changed his life. He had, at last, found his calling. The paper was called The Special Theory of Relativity. He was called Albert Einstein. Hello and welcome to Souliloquy, with me Priyam Marik. On today's episode, I will be discussing the tricky business of a calling, and what is it, if anything at all, that we are meant to do with our wonderful lives. As a kid, I wanted to be many things. Initially, I wanted to be an astronaut and fly into space, long before I had held a physics textbook, which of course made me change my mind. Then I wanted to be a cricketer and score centuries for my country. Who would want to be a bowler in India anyway? I dismissed the idea after cementing my ordinariness during 4 years of cricket training at an academy. Then, during my early teens, a part of me wanted to be an actor. I gave up on that when I realized that acting off-screen is easier and also inevitable. When I was in the second standard, I remember this question all the students in my class had to answer. It read, "What do you want to become when you grow up?" I don't recall what I had written myself, but I do remember that one of the students in my class had written that he wanted to be a woodcutter. At the time I was shocked and asked myself, why would he allow himself to be a woodcutter? Today, when I think about this, I ask myself whether society would have allowed him to be a woodcutter. The point is, most of the time we don't get to decide what we want to be. In many ways, our dreams perish at the altar of ambitions. Ambitions which have been created by the society we live in. I would like to believe that most of us have some form of talent or the other, but very often this talent does not coincide with the career society shoves down our throats. Worse still, sometimes this talent is never discovered. Our family, our friends, our relatives, everyone usually has a take on what we should do. They, in tandem with the market, invariably decide our career, a decision which in most of our cases carries the illusion of choice. If you doubt this, ask yourself what you're doing right now and what led you to it. Did you really want to dedicate 2 years of your life to outdoing thousands of your peers in a competitive exam? You may be taking home a fat salary, but are your pockets of happiness full too? For my part, I'm currently studying journalism, though I'd always liked history more. But then history does not make for great employability, or so I was told. I don't know whether I'll end up becoming a journalist. I don't know whether I really want to become a journalist, perhaps because I never had the time to reflect on what exactly I want to be. There are certain aspects of journalism that fascinate me, it's true, but I'm equally intrigued by certain aspects of diplomacy and politics, creative writing and marketing. Can I harness all these elements in a single profession? Probably not, for the simple reason that unlike selecting groceries at a supermarket, we cannot accommodate the best bits of different callings in the cart of life. I may not know what I will eventually become, but I do know for a fact that I don't want to be mediocre. I don't want a monotonous schedule, waking up and repeating the same formula day in, day out. I want to be different, to leave an impact, to pursue greatness perhaps. But I'm not sure how. One of my friends once told me that greatness cannot be an objective, it can only be an outcome. I wonder if I'll ever be able to settle that debate for myself. But that's the thing, isn't it? All of us at some stage or the other want to make a difference, be unique. We feel a sudden surge out of nowhere to change the world, to pioneer something, to make a tangible change in the lives of others. And then we see the next cat video on Facebook and forget all about it. Or in my case, 10 simple ways to make sumptuous chocolate cakes. But our desire to be different lurks within us, at least until we hit the crippling wall of cynicism. And this desire to be exceptional, to be different, makes it easy for society to peddle myths to us. Do this, do that, go here, go there, achieve this, achieve that, and you'll be a standout. One such myth is about leaving India and going to study abroad, the promise of a better education and better opportunities. I bought this myth myself, and while I cannot question the better facilities, I don't know if it makes me any different, if it makes me stand out. The moment we take one step to be different, we follow in the trail of those who have done the same. And soon enough, we realize we are just another face in a different crowd. Perhaps to you I sound like a romantic who's just glorifying individualism. Maybe the goal of a calling is not to be unique or great. Maybe it is to be ordinary and of service to those around us. Speaking of service, I had decided last month to work at a restaurant here in the UK to earn myself some quick cash. During my trial day, I was asked to cater to a couple of tables. Now, I never worked as a waiter before, but I obviously knew what the job entailed and thought to myself, this should be easy enough. My first task was to get poppadoms, which a group of middle-aged Englishmen had ordered as snacks. It was the first time I'd heard the word, and repeated it with some bewilderment in the kitchen. Where are the poppadoms kept? I asked frantically. Out came a whole box of poppadoms, which it turned out was a fancy British way of saying popper. Unfortunately, I didn't know that. Nor did I know how to slide a trolley containing dancing plates of hot food while trying to push open the kitchen door with my back. Pouring drinks precisely enough to fill the glass to the brim without spilling a single drop seemed so daunting that I stayed away from the bar during my 2-hour demo shift. Rummaging for my pad, I could not remember the fourth of 5 items a polite gentleman in not-so-polite attire had ordered for dinner. After a breathless spell of scribbing, pouring, balancing, serving, and cleaning, interspersed with short bursts of darting around the restaurant, I finally managed a breather. Smoothing the crease on my shirt, I envied the girl casually sipping soup in front of me. Life at this end of the table was hard. To be called by customers and cooks was certainly not my calling. The other day I was looking at some of the recent conversations I've had with my friends in India on WhatsApp. In these chats, my friends and I go in some detail talking about what we are doing these days. I tell them about my restaurant experience, the projects I've been working on. They tell me they're preparing for this exam, authoring this paper, completing this job. But when it comes to how we are doing these days, almost all these conversations get restricted to, I'm good, what about you? Isn't it a pity that our identities are defined so much more by what we do, and so less by how we feel? Of course, not all professions or callings impose an identity on the professional. You would not identify a Japanese oshia as a pusher, although that is precisely what they do for a living, pushing people gently but sternly into trains during rush hours to avoid delays. In the medieval days, only 3 pursuits received the labels of profession: divinity, law, and medicine. Today, there are countless certified jobs one can do, from getting paid to watch Netflix to officiating as a professional mourner. In spite of all of this, I'm not sure what a calling really means. Is it a job, a vocation, a profession, an area of expertise? Whatever be the right definition, we spend a significant portion of our lives identifying this calling. Of course, very few of us have a blueprint that we strictly cater to. In most cases, our callings, or whatever you want to call them, are like shifting sands on a beach, moving gradually as the waves of time and opportunity crash in on them. My problem is not with the uncertainty of a calling. At one level, I find the suspense of what I eventually will be quite exciting. But I do take an issue with the obsession around a calling. It disgusts me when I see parents tailoring a career for their children when these kids are just 5 or 6 years old. In many places in India, it is a custom to surround a 1-year-old child with objects in a ceremony, in a bid to predict what they will become in life depending on what object they pick. The scary part is a lot of people do not take this in jest, which often influences the objects in the first place. Then there are those who try to accomplish vicariously through their offspring what they couldn't in their own lives. Look no further than the Bollywood blockbuster Dangal, for an example. Accomplishments, needless to say, come hard-bound with materialism. I cringe every time I see someone share a meme on social media that says something along the lines of, "I'd rather cry in a BMW than smile on a bicycle." My cringe turns into something more discomforting when I sense myself nodding along. And perhaps that's the tragedy of our generation, a horde of individuals who have been raised to market themselves, conditioned to conflate and confuse success and happiness, calling and being. But who is to blame? The import of the American neoliberal order? The disguised apathy of hyper-commercialization? Or maybe the frustrations of the middle class that stem from both? Identifying the culprit counts for little. Realizing that we are becoming victims is what matters. At the end of the day, there is no true calling. There is merely a chasm between multiple cravings and a singular compulsion. And for most of us, that is good enough for a career of compromise.